Sonar, we have a contact bearing 270.
Classification?
Uniform, heavy cavitation.
March 14th, 1982. 180 meters beneath the Barents Sea, Soviet Northern Fleet SOSA station Polyarny. The rhythmic ping of the sonar display cast green shadows across Captain second-rank Dmitry Volkov's face. He leaned forward in his chair, headphones pressed tight against his ears. Around him, the tracking station hummed with the muted activity of the night watch. 12 men crammed into a space that smelled of cigarette smoke, warm electronics, and the dampness that clung to every Soviet outpost north of the Arctic Circle. Volkov's fingers hovered over the frequency analyzer. His eyes narrowed. There it was again, that signature. "Contact bearing 270, he said, his voice cutting through the low murmur. "Ina, 40 kilometers. Speed, 8 knots. Depth, about 120 meters. Senior Lieutenant Konstantin Petrov rolled his chair across the cramped room, boots scraping on the metal floor. 15 years older than Volkov, he'd been listening to the ocean's secrets since before most of his crew were born. He pressed one side of his headset to his ear, closed his eyes, and listened. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Los Angeles class," Petrov said with quiet satisfaction, "and listen to her sing, Dmitri, like a tractor crossing a gravel road." Around the room, the other operators took notice. The graveyard shift suddenly had life, an American fast-attack submarine, one of their high-tech boats, blaring loud enough to wake the whales. Volkov adjusted the controls, isolating the acoustic signature. Petrov was right. The cavitation was obvious, propeller blades popping tiny bubbles in a steady rhythm. The reduction gears whined like tired machinery. Even the hull seemed to vibrate, painting a clear picture across their sonar displays. "She's not even trying to be quiet," muttered Yuri Malinin from his corner. He was transcribing the data on paper that unspooled endlessly from the recorder. "What are the Americans doing? Do they think we're deaf?" Petrov chuckled, the dry laugh of a man who'd spent decades in this frozen post, listening to Soviet submarines vanish into the North Atlantic, while their American rivals, for all their billion-dollar technology, still thundered like circus bands. "Mark it in the log," Petrov said, leaning back with satisfaction. "American submarine, Los Angeles class, probable. Loud machinery across multiple frequencies. Course, southwesterly. Confidence, high." Volkov's pen scratched across the logbook. Another detection. Another small victory. Proof that for all America's boasts, the Soviet Navy still knew how to build submarines properly. Quietly. Efficiently. Deadly. The green glow of the sonar screen pulsed with each refresh. The contact stayed clear. Almost too clear. Almost too steady. "She's maintaining course," Volkov said. "No evasive maneuvers. No speed changes." "Why would she?" Petrov replied, lighting a cigarette. "The Americans probably don't even know we can hear them. Their admirals sit in Washington thinking their submarines are invisible, while we track them like schoolchildren watching ants."
"Gentlemen, our window is closing. If they cut off this supply line here, the entire operation fails. We initiate the blockade at 0900.
Over the next 6 weeks, the pattern became impossible to ignore. March 29th, 1982. Northern Fleet Intelligence Center, Severomorsk. Captain First Rank Viktor Kuzmin stood before a wall-sized chart of the North Atlantic. Red pins clustered along the GI-UK gap, that crucial stretch of ocean between Greenland, Iceland, and the United Kingdom, where Soviet submarines had to pass to reach the open Atlantic. Each pin marked a detected American submarine contact, tagged with dates, acoustic signatures, and tracking data. There were 17 of them. 17 separate American submarines detected in just 45 days. "They're everywhere," said Commander Alexei Borodin, gesturing at the chart with a wooden pointer. Kuzmin's deputy was a meticulous analyst who'd spent the morning compiling reports from every SOSUS station, every patrol ship, every listening post from Murmansk to the Norwegian Sea. Los Angeles class, mostly. A few older Sturgeon class. All of them loud enough to track with passive arrays alone. Kuzmin folded his arms, studying the chart. A career intelligence officer, he'd been trained to see patterns, to find meaning in the noise, and this one was unmistakable. "Cavitation signatures?" he asked. Borodin flipped open a thick folder. "Pronounced on all contacts. Propeller noise between 200 and 400 Hz, gear whine clearly audible. Hull vibrations across multiple frequencies. The Americans aren't even attempting acoustic dampening." "Or they can't," offered Lieutenant Sokolov, the youngest officer in the room, his new uniform still crisp. "Maybe their technology isn't as advanced as they claim." Kuzmin turned toward him. It was a tempting thought. The Americans had spent billions developing the Los Angeles class, nuclear-powered fast-attack submarines that supposedly represented the cutting edge of naval design. Their admirals bragged about speed, depth, and stealth, and yet here they were, blundering through monitored waters like drunk bears. "Station Poliani tracked one contact for 8 continuous hours last week," Borodin said, tapping his pointer against the northernmost cluster of pins. "Steady course, steady speed, no evasive action. Passed within 30 kilometers of 3 Soviet positions." "Either profound incompetence," Kuzmin said slowly, "or profound arrogance." "Perhaps both, sir." Kuzmin stepped closer to the chart, tracing the pins with his eyes. The American submarines seemed to be running standard patrols, barrier operations meant to detect Soviet boats pushing into the Atlantic. It was a familiar Cold War dance, but something felt off. "Pull the acoustic signatures from the archive," he said. "Compare them with American subs detected in the 70s, before the Los Angeles class. I want to see the difference." Borodin jotted a note. "You think the older boats were quieter?" "I think we need to verify," Kuzmin replied. "The Americans didn't become the world's second naval power by building submarines that sound like freight trains. There should be improvement over time. If their newest boats are louder than their old ones, I want to know why." Still, even as he said it, Kuzmin felt the tug of an easier explanation. The West, for all its money and glamour, simply wasn't as precise as Soviet engineering. They built in bulk, they advertised, they didn't perfect. "Continue tracking all contacts," he ordered. "Compile reports for the Admirals' morning briefing. Signatures, courses, speeds, probable missions, everything." "Yes, sir." When Borodin and Sokolov left, Kuzmin lingered by the window, gazing out over the grey waters of Kola Bay. Somewhere beneath that endless expanse, American submarines prowled the deep, noisy, confident, almost careless. The thought that nagged at him was simple. Why would they want to be heard? He pushed it aside. Intelligence was about facts, not speculation. And the facts were clear. The Americans were loud, traceable, and operating with all the subtlety of a marching band. The Soviet Navy would keep listening, keep tracking, keep documenting every American mistake. It was, Kuzmin thought, almost too easy.
"This data confirms hostile submarine activity in Sector 4. We are looking at an imminent threat."
April 22nd, 1982, Soviet Northern Fleet Headquarters, Main Conference Room. Admiral Georgy Yegorov sat at the head of the long, polished table, uniform immaculate, expression carved from granite. Behind him, the Soviet naval ensign hung against wood-paneled walls. Pale spring sunlight, thin this far north, spilled through the tall windows and lit the faces of 11 senior officers gathered for the monthly intelligence briefing. Captain First Rank Viktor Kuzmin stood beside the projection screen, pointer in hand, as slides clicked through the carousel. Sonar waterfall displays, acoustic spectrograms, tracking charts dense with data. 2 months of American submarine activity condensed into 40 minutes of material. "In summary, Comrade Admiral," Kuzmin said, advancing to the final slide, "we've confirmed 23 separate American submarine contacts since March 1st. Los Angeles-class submarines make up about 70%. The rest are older Sturgeon and Permit-class boats." Yegorov's fingers drummed once on the table. "Detection ranges?" Average of 38 kilometers on passive sonar alone, sir. Our SOSUS arrays are tracking them clearly. In 3 cases, we maintained contact for more than 12 hours. And they made no attempt at evasion. None that we could determine. Standard patrol routes, predictable courses, no countermeasures. Admiral Nikolai Smirnov, commander of the submarine forces, leaned forward. A submariner to his core, he'd commanded diesel boats in the 60s and nuclear boats in the 70s. His look mixed satisfaction with disbelief. Their cavitation is really that bad? Smirnov asked. These are their newest boats? Kuzmin nodded and brought up a comparison slide. 2 acoustic signatures appeared side by side, one from a Soviet Victor III class, the other from an American Los Angeles class. The contrast was striking, the Soviet profile smooth and quiet, the American one scattered with noise across the spectrum. The Americans have spent billions on the Los Angeles program, Kuzmin explained, yet the signatures suggest basic design flaws: poor propeller geometry, weak machinery dampening, inadequate hull coating. Our analysts think they prioritized speed and weapons over stealth. A critical mistake, said Vice Admiral Popov from across the table. Commander of the surface fleet, he had little love for submarines, but even he could appreciate the implication. A submarine that can't hide is just a target. Yegorov rose and moved to the screen. He studied the jagged lines of the American signature, frequencies spiking like static. 40 years in the Soviet Navy had taken him from diesel patrols in the Great Patriotic War to nuclear leviathans capable of striking across the globe. These contacts, Yegorov said quietly, they're operating inside our monitored zones on purpose. They must know about our SOSUS coverage in the GI-UK gap. If they know, Comrade Admiral, they show no concern, Kuzmin replied. The American Navy has always believed its technology makes it untouchable. A low chuckle rolled around the table, professional soldiers savoring the sight of their rivals stumbling. The Americans, with their Hollywood bravado and television admirals, boasting of naval supremacy. And yet their submarines were loud, trackable, vulnerable. What are our own boats reporting? Yegorov asked. Smirnov opened a red folder. K324 reported contact with what we assess as a Los Angeles class 3 weeks ago. The American was running a sprint and drift pattern. Our commander tracked it for 40 minutes before breaking off to avoid counter-detection. And the American never detected K324. No indication of awareness, Comrade Admiral. Yegorov returned to his seat, expression thoughtful. Around the table, the tone shifted, from routine analysis to quiet triumph. Soviet submarine technology, long dismissed in Western press, was proving superior where it mattered most. Recommendations? Yegorov asked. Maintain enhanced monitoring, Kuzmin answered. Expand SOSUS coverage. Send more patrol vessels to the GI-UK gap. We should exploit this advantage while the Americans remain unaware of their vulnerability. Agreed, Smirnov said, and brief our submarine commanders on these acoustic patterns. If the Americans are this loud, we can detect them earlier and avoid engagement altogether. Vice Admiral Popov raised a hand. Should we notify GRU? NATO's entire naval posture could be affected. Yegorov considered, then nodded. Prepare a sanitized report for Main Intelligence Directorate. Include the acoustic data, but conceal our SOSUS capability. The Americans don't need to know how we're hearing them. The meeting ended with assignments issued, tracking protocols expanded, and a sense that the Northern Fleet had scored a significant intelligence victory. As officers filtered out, cigarettes already in hand, only Kuzmin lingered. Something else, Victor? Yegorov asked, noticing his hesitation. Perhaps nothing, Comrade Admiral, Kuzmin said carefully. But the Americans have operated submarines successfully for decades. This level of noise feels inconsistent. Yegorov studied him. You suspect deception? I think we should stay cautious with our conclusions. Caution is wise, Yegorov agreed. But sometimes, Victor, the enemy really does make mistakes. Keep monitoring, and don't look for conspiracies where incompetence fits the facts. Yes, Comrade Admiral. Kuzmin left the conference room, but the unease stayed with him. In intelligence work, anything that seemed too good to be true usually was. May 18th, 1982. Northern Fleet Intelligence Center, 3:47 hours. Junior Lieutenant Pavel Noskov sat alone in the analysis room, surrounded by stacks of acoustic signature reports that had been piling up for months. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their cold glow reflecting off the dull metal desks. Somewhere down the hall, a cleaning woman's radio played softly, a violation of security protocols, but at this hour no one cared. Noskov was 24, newly graduated from the Frunze Naval Academy with honors in signals analysis. Bright, methodical, and cursed with an obsessive attention to detail, it made him excellent at his job and terrible at finishing assignments on time. His current task was simple on paper: compile a comprehensive database of all American submarine contacts for the quarterly intelligence summary. What should have taken 3 days had stretched into 2 weeks, because Noskov couldn't stop noticing things that didn't quite fit. He spread 3 contact reports across the desk, different dates, different locations. Contact Alpha 7, detected March 29th, bearing 285 degrees from Station Poliani, range 42 kilometers. Los Angeles-class submarine, distinctive cavitation pattern, tracked for 6.5 hours moving southwest at 8 knots. Contact Delta 12, detected April 3rd, bearing 310 degrees, range 38 kilometers. Los Angeles-class submarine, identical cavitation pattern, tracked for 5 hours moving south at 9 knots. Contact Echo 19, detected April 8th, bearing 295 degrees, range 44 kilometers. Los Angeles-class submarine, identical cavitation pattern, tracked for 7 hours moving southeast at 8 knots. Noskov pulled out a calculator and a chart of the Barents Sea. He had been doing this for hours, plotting tracks, measuring distances, checking timelines. And no matter how many times he ran the numbers, they refused to make sense. A Los Angeles-class submarine had a maximum sustained speed of roughly 25 knots submerged. To travel from Contact Alpha 7's last known position on March 29th to Delta 12's initial detection on April 3rd, about 850 nautical miles, the submarine would have had to maintain 7.5 knots continuously for 5 days. Possible. Inefficient, but possible. But then Echo 19 appeared 5 days later, 420 nautical miles northeast of Delta 12's last position. That transit required an average speed of 3.5 knots. Why would a submarine sprint for days, then crawl for another 5? It made no tactical sense. Submarines patrolled slowly for stealth or moved fast to reposition. Not both, not randomly. Noskov lit his 3rd cigarette of the night and pulled out more reports. The pattern repeated. American submarines appearing in sequence. Position A, then position B, but the time, distance, and direction rarely lined up. Some would have had to move impossibly fast, others impossibly slow. And in 3 cases, 2 sightings of the same submarine would have required it to be in 2 places at once. The worst example came from mid-April. Contact Gamma 15, Los Angeles-class submarine, detected by Station Poliani on April 15th, 14:30 hours, position 71 degree north, 35 degree east. Contact Gamma 17, Los Angeles-class submarine, detected by patrol ship Vodoknovenyi on April 15th, 16:45 hours, position 70 degree north, 28 degree east. Noskov measured the distance, 380 kilometers. Time elapsed, 2 hours 15 minutes. To cover that distance submerged, the submarine would have needed to travel at 93 knots. Impossible. Physically impossible. The fastest submarine on Earth, Soviet or American, barely touched 45 knots, and only in brief bursts that strained the reactor and risked structural failure. Unless they weren't the same submarine. Noskov froze, cigarette burning down unnoticed between his fingers. What if the signals weren't from different submarines at all? What if they were identical sources, producing identical sounds? He flipped open the technical analysis folder and scanned the acoustic comparisons. Every Los Angeles-class submarine carried its own fingerprint, slight differences in propeller machining, gear resonance, and hull vibration. No two ever matched exactly, except these did. Contacts Alpha 7, Delta 12, and Echo 19, supposedly separate patrols, had signatures matching with impossible precision. Cavitation peaks within 2 Hz. Gear whine identical. Even the hull resonance curve, a subtle vibration unique to each boat, was the same. Noskov whispered, "It's the same sound." He stared at the spectrograms. Not the same submarine making the same sound, the same recording. A chill ran through him. Someone, somewhere, was feeding the Soviet arrays fabricated noise. Artificial tracks, echoes of submarines that might not even be there. He stubbed out his cigarette and reached for the phone. It was nearly 4 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. He dialed the duty officer's extension. "This is Junior Lieutenant Noskov, Analysis Section," he said, voice tight. "I need to speak with Captain Kuzmin immediately." "The captain is not on duty until—" "Now," Noskov cut in. "Call him at home. Tell him we have a critical anomaly in the American submarine tracking data." He hesitated, then added quietly, "Tell him the Americans may not be as incompetent as we believed."
The contact is moving directly towards grid sector 49er. Confirmed. We must assume hostile intent. Recommend immediate evasive maneuver, Captain.
May 18th, 1982. Northern Fleet Intelligence Center, 07:15 hours. Captain First Rank Kuzmin arrived at his office with his uniform jacket still unbuttoned and his face unshaven. Details that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. He had driven through the empty dawn streets in silence, Noskov's midnight words replaying in his mind with growing dread. Behind him, Commander Borodin and 2 senior analysts hurried to keep pace. Noskov stood as they entered. His desk was buried under charts, spectrograms, and graph paper scrawled with equations. The young lieutenant looked exhausted, eyes bloodshot, a half-cold coffee beside an ashtray overflowing with cigarette butts. "Show me," Kuzmin said without preamble. Noskov spread the contact reports across the larger conference table, arranging them chronologically. "I've identified 37 American submarine contacts over the past 11 weeks, he said. 22 of them show anomalies that can't be reconciled with known submarine capabilities." "What kind of anomalies?" Borodin asked, leaning closer. "Transit speeds exceeding physical limits, submarines appearing in multiple locations within timeframes that would require speeds of up to 90 knots, and most critically," Noskov pulled a new stack of charts forward, identical acoustic signatures across supposedly different patrols. He placed 3 spectrograms side by side under the desk lamp. These 3 contacts were detected weeks apart, hundreds of kilometers apart. According to our tracking data, they're the same Los Angeles-class submarine conducting separate missions. But look at the acoustic signatures. Kuzmin leaned over the charts. He'd reviewed thousands of submarine acoustics in his career. He knew how no two were ever the same. Each propeller, each gearbox, each hull had its own subtle imperfections. The sonar equivalent of a fingerprint. These were identical, not merely similar, identical. Identical, cavitation frequency matches within half a hertz. Noskov continued, his voice gaining confidence. Reduction gear harmonics match exactly. Propeller blade rate, identical. No degradation, no variation, nothing changes. "Impossible," said senior analyst Gregorov, a former submarine engineer. "Mechanical systems always change. Bearings wear, blades corrode, shafts misalign. The acoustic signature of a submarine drifts with every patrol." He stopped, realization creeping into his expression. These signatures aren't changing because they're not coming from submarines. The room went silent except for the buzz of the fluorescent lights and the distant rattle of typewriters in the outer offices. Kuzmin walked to the window, staring out at Severomorsk as the Arctic sun climbed over the frozen hills. His mind raced through the implications: tactical, strategic, catastrophic. Decoys, Borodin said finally. The word fell heavy. Acoustic decoys, towed devices broadcasting recorded submarine signatures. Noskov nodded. It's the only explanation that fits. The Americans aren't sailing noisy submarines through our monitored zones. They're towing noisemakers, probably from surface ships or quiet submarines, each broadcasting pre-recorded Los Angeles signatures. But why? Gregorov asked. What would they gain from that? Kuzmin turned back to the table, his face grim. Because while we were tracking the decoys, congratulating ourselves on detecting their noisy submarines, their real submarines were operating undetected, silent, invisible. The implication hit like a physical blow. Every man in the room understood submarine warfare, the invisible chess game beneath the sea, and now they saw it clearly. The Americans had been playing a different game entirely. How long? The voice came from the doorway. No one had heard him enter. Admiral Yegorov stood there, arms folded, his expression carved from stone. The duty officer had clearly called him in. How long have we been tracking ghosts? He asked. Based on the data, Noskov replied, forcing his voice to remain steady. Possibly since March, maybe longer. We'll need to re-examine 6 months of contact records to know for certain. Yegorov stepped forward, eyes scanning the charts with the slow, precise focus of a man watching the foundation of his intelligence network crumble. Our SOSUS stations, our patrol ships, our submarine commanders, all reporting contacts, tracking American submarines, logging movement patterns. His voice hardened, and none of it was real. Not all of it, Comrade Admiral, Kuzmin said carefully. Some contacts may be genuine, but until we reanalyze every dataset, we can't tell which. The decoys were designed to mimic real Los Angeles signatures, and they succeeded. Too perfectly, Borodin added quietly. That's what gave them away. Real submarines have variation. These were flawless. Yegorov picked up one of the acoustic charts. His hand trembled. From anger, exhaustion, or humiliation, no one could tell. So while we were counting their submarines, briefing Moscow about American incompetence, where were their actual boats? No one answered. They all knew the truth. Everywhere. Operating unseen. Listening, watching, gathering intelligence. Tracking Soviet submarines, positioning near naval bases, eavesdropping on fleet communications. The Americans hadn't been arrogant, they'd been brilliant. Get me Admiral Smirnov, Yegorov said finally, his voice like cold steel. And the commanders of every SOSUS station. I want every American contact from the past 6 months reanalyzed. I want to know how these decoys work, where they were deployed from, and how to distinguish them from genuine submarines. He turned to Noskov, who stood stiffly at attention, looking like he hadn't slept in days. You did well, Lieutenant, Yegorov said, his tone softening. Your attention to detail may have prevented a far worse disaster. Dismissed. Get some rest. Noskov saluted and left quietly. The door shut behind him with a soft click. Yegorov remained at the table, staring at the charts that had just upended 2 months of confident intelligence reports. Around him, officers began the grim task of unraveling how deeply they had been deceived. Victor, Yegorov said finally to Kuzmin, you voiced doubts after the April briefing. You said something didn't add up. Yes, Comrade Admiral. In the future, Yegorov said, his voice heavy, trust your instincts, especially when the easier explanation feels more comfortable. Kuzmin said nothing. Outside, the Arctic morning brightened over Severomorsk, indifferent to the quiet panic rippling through Soviet naval intelligence. A silent acknowledgement that the Americans had been 3 moves ahead all along.
Pay close attention to the deployment parameters shown here. Failure to maintain standoff distance renders the towed decoy ineffective.
June 3, 1982. Main Intelligence Directorate, GRU, Moscow. The classified briefing room was windowless and silent, its sound-dampening panels swallowing every echo. 27 senior intelligence officers sat motionless as Captain First Rank Kuzmin concluded 45 minutes of uncomfortable truth. On the projection screen behind him, a single schematic glowed, a towed acoustic decoy, the American ANSL-Q-25 Nixie. Elegant, simple, devastating. In summary, Kuzmin said, voice steady but hollow, we assess that the U.S. Navy conducted a coordinated acoustic deception campaign beginning no later than February 1982. Multiple platforms deployed towed noisemakers throughout the GI-UK gap and northern approaches. These decoys successfully mimicked Los Angeles-class submarines, drawing our attention while real American boats operated in near-total silence. Colonel General Ivanov, head of GRU's naval intelligence, leaned forward, a relic of every Soviet era since Stalin, his face unreadable. How many real American submarine contacts remain confirmed? He asked. Kuzmin swallowed. Of 73 contacts initially logged as Los Angeles class, 58 were decoys, the remaining 15 possibly genuine, though confidence is low. 15, Ivanov repeated quietly, and the submarines we didn't detect? A pause, then the answer everyone feared. Unknown, Comrade General. If American stealth is as advanced as our data indicates, it's possible several submarines operated near our bases, patrol zones, even ballistic missile bastions, completely undetected. A murmur spread across the room. The officers understood the implication. Soviet deterrence relied on the invisibility of its own submarines. If the Americans could stalk them without being heard, the entire strategic balance, the very credibility of the USSR's nuclear deterrent, was in question. Rear Admiral Kuznetsov, representing the Pacific Fleet, broke the silence. How did the Americans achieve this? What changed? Preliminary analysis points to multiple advances, Kuzmin replied. 7-bladed propellers with optimized blade geometry. Machinery mounted on isolation rafts. Anechoic hull coatings. And, he hesitated, training. Their commanders are drilled in ultra-quiet operations. While we were busy chasing their decoys, they perfected silence. General Petrov, seated near the back, gave a grim smile. Maskirovka, he said, deception. They used our own doctrine against us. The irony hung heavy. The Soviets had written the book on military deception. Now, the Americans had beaten them with it. Ivanov gestured at the next slide. Patrol logs appeared, fragments of confusion and failure. K-324 tracked what we now know was a decoy on March 28th. K-488 lost contact with an American submarine that simply vanished. K-501 detected a Los Angeles-class boat on April 12th, then lost it completely despite ideal sonar conditions. Kuznetsov frowned. Evaded? Either that, Kuzmin said, or K-501 was chasing a decoy that was switched off or recovered. In both cases, our position was compromised, for nothing. Ivanov stood and approached the glowing schematic. Operational implications? Severe. The Americans now know our detection ranges, patrol routes, and response procedures. By observing our reactions to their decoys, they mapped our entire northern network. The realization hit the room like a depth charge. The Americans hadn't just fooled the Soviets, they had learned from them. Every sonar ping, every frequency shift, every mobilization order had become an intelligence leak. Recommendations? Ivanov asked at last. Kuzmin changed slides again, a list of costly, years-long reforms. Comprehensive reanalysis of all contact data, technical collection on American acoustic advances, algorithmic discrimination training for operators, expansion of SOSA's coverage, and, most urgently, acceleration of our submarine quieting programs. Admiral Kuznetsov exhaled slowly. If they can build submarines we can't hear, we must assume they can hear ours. That was the unspoken fear, now spoken aloud. Soviet submarines, long believed to be the hunters, might already be the hunted. Ivanov nodded grimly. The Americans executed this with precision. They understood our psychology, our doctrine, our pride. They made us believe their submarines were loud, until silence fell. He gestured at the schematic. This device, this simple noisemaker, defeated our northern defense grid for months. Not through superior hardware, but through superior understanding. The officers filed out quietly. Only Ivanov remained, staring at the glowing diagram as though it mocked him. "You know what troubles me most, Victor?" he asked quietly. Kuzmin paused by the door. "Comrade General?" "We still don't know what they were hiding. Those silent submarines we never detected. What were they doing?" Kuzmin had no answer, and that was the point. The Americans had manufactured blindness. While the Soviets chased ghosts, the US Navy had operated unseen, perhaps beneath Soviet missile bases, perhaps along Arctic transit routes, perhaps collecting data that Moscow would never recover. Ivanov spoke again, almost to himself. "The operation's over. They'll shift tactics now. They achieved what they came for." He turned to face Kuzmin. "Study it. Understand it. Never let this happen again. The Americans just taught us a lesson worth a generation of war." "Yes, Comrade General." Outside, Moscow was bright with summer light, ordinary, oblivious. But Kuzmin felt none of it. Something fundamental had been lost. Not data, not sonar records, but certainty. The illusion that Soviet technology could match the West. The belief that the underwater war followed familiar rules. The Americans had changed those rules. Somewhere under the Atlantic, their submarines still prowled, unseen, unheard, and now undeniably superior. The mocking had stopped. The laughter about noisy capitalist machines was dead. And in the silent war beneath the waves, the Americans had proven they weren't just playing chess. They were playing in a dimension the Soviets hadn't yet discovered. The Cold War continued, but beneath the surface the balance had shifted into silence, deception, and fear.